Hello and welcome everybody. I'm Anthony Gonzalez and I'm the Senior Program Coordinator with the Higher Education Center. And I want to welcome you all today to our first session in our Spring Learning Collaborative. Today's session is titled HECAOD Through the Years, Leadership Reflections on Shaping Collegiate AOD Prevention Efforts, featuring our past directors, Dr. John Clapp, Dr. William Dejong, and our current Executive Director, Dr. Jim Lange, and is moderated by Lucey. Before we get started with today's session, I do just have a couple of housekeeping slides I'd like to share with everybody. Here on the screen should look somewhat familiar as we are in the Zoom webinar format. We do welcome your questions at any time throughout the live session, but we do kindly ask that you utilize the Q&A feature. We do have the chat enabled, so please feel free to introduce yourself and share where you're joining us from, as well as any reflections and resources as it relates to today's content. But we do kindly ask that you utilize the Q&A feature for any questions. We also encourage everybody to learn more about becoming a member of the Higher Education Center. You can learn more about the different membership tiers and the benefits that go along with them by visiting our website at hecaod.osu.edu. We also have a few upcoming events I'd like to share with everybody. The next session in our Spring Learning Collaborative will be taking place. It's an all-day event on April 24th, taking place virtually. The first session is titled Building on Success, Lessons Learned from Alcohol Harm Reduction. The next section, it will be then focusing on the recovery landscape, milestones, current trends, and future directions. And then we'll be ending the day with a panel on empowering the future, insights and impacts in campus health and wellness. We also have a free webinar taking place April 16th and is featuring our very own Logan Davis. And we'll be focusing on connecting the dots, working with fraternities and sororities. Additionally, we have extended the call for proposals for the 2025 national meeting. The call for proposals will be closing this Friday, March 28th. And with that, it is my great pleasure to turn it over to our moderator and panelists today. Joining us today again is Dr. John Clapp, Dr. William Dejong, Dr. Jim Lange, and Rich Lucey. Thank you all for joining us, and it's my pleasure turning it over to you, Rich, at this time.
Great. Thank you, Anthony, and welcome to everybody who's joining us on this live event. I first want to thank the center for inviting me to be the moderator for today's event. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Rich Lucey, one of the Senior Prevention Program Managers here at the Drug Enforcement Administration in our Community Outreach and Prevention Support section. So Anthony told you who our three panelists are today. Let me tell you briefly a little bit more about each of them. Dr. Bill Dejong is a consultant specializing in strategic planning and program design for public health interventions with a focus on changing social norms and behaviors, health communications, technology transfer, and policy and program evaluation. Dr. Dejong served as director of the U.S. Department of Education's Higher Education Center for Alcohol, Drug Abuse, and Violence Prevention from 1995 through 2004. He is the author of over 400 monographs, book chapters, academic papers, and other publications in substance misuse prevention, health promotion, criminal justice, social psychology, and the use of media to change social norms and behaviors. Dr. John Clapp is a professor at the USC Suzanne Dworak Peck School of Social Work, a fellow in the American Academy of Health Behavior. He is currently studying the system dynamics of drinking events with a team of engineers and computer scientists with the goal of developing smart, real-time prevention applications. Dr. Clapp served 6 years as the director of the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery. He has published more than 100 journal articles, with his work appearing in the Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs, Addiction, Drug and Alcohol Dependence, among numerous other top research journals. Dr. Jim Lange is the current executive director of the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery, an academic center of The Ohio State University. But he lives in San Diego, where he is San Diego State University's coordinator of alcohol and other drug initiatives. He has served in leadership roles within the collegiate prevention field, including as the executive committee co-chair of the network addressing collegiate alcohol and other drug issues, and continues to serve on SAMHSA's Prevention Technology Transfer Center Network Advisory Board. He is credited with over 70 peer-reviewed and scholarly publications and over 180 conference and invited guest presentations. I'm exhausted just going through all your bios. It's it is just great to have all three of you again. Bill and John and Jim, welcome to this live event. For our viewers, I'll reiterate what Anthony said at the beginning. Please use the Q&A feature. If you have any questions, when you pop the questions in there, let us know if it's for a specific person or if it's for anybody on the panel to answer our questions. And basically how we're running the next hour and 25 minutes or so is I've got a series of questions that we had developed, and one of our panelists is more or less going to take the lead in answering the question, and then the other two will jump in with some reactions and follow-up comments. And so we're going to just jump right in, and I'm going to start with Bill. And you're all going to basically have the same question for this first one, but I'm interested to hear from your perspective, what were the top one or two prevention-related issues facing colleges and universities during your time as the center's director?
Well, as I think back at that time, I think the main problem was just a very limited understanding of the true extent and nature of the problem due to college student alcohol and other drug use. Part of this was not understanding the prevention paradox. So, for example, frequent heavy drinkers are more likely to experience or cause alcohol-related harms. They're more likely to experience or cause alcohol-related harms. But the vast majority of those harms are caused by more moderate drinkers because there are so many of them. And because they did not understand the prevention paradox, the focus was on general education, which unfortunately there was very little research to support, and helping problem drinkers get treatment. It also meant that there was a failure to understand what I came to call environmental management. According to Peter Lake, who's an expert in higher education law, the courts came to expect colleges and universities to take reasonable protective measures to guard against foreseeable hazards and risks in the campus environment. So stated differently, they have a legal obligation to manage the campus environment similar to the responsibilities that any property owner has. So with that framework of thinking about the environment, you could broaden the scope of meaningful prevention activities. And this would include offering and promoting more social, extracurricular, and public service opportunities that do not include alcohol and other drugs. That's something now that schools have fully embraced. Creating a social, academic, and residential environment that supports health promoting norms. Now, I have to say, I'm going to be revealing my age here, but when I was a freshman and a sophomore at Dartmouth College back in the day, we had Saturday morning classes. And the express purpose, according to the dean of freshmen who communicated to our parents, was to keep Friday nights under control and to prevent us from leaving every weekend for Boston, New York, Montreal, Sodom, or Gomorrah. It was an environmental management strategy. And so the very idea that so many schools have in effect institutionalized a 3-day weekend, that does not promote health promoting norms. So that's just one example. Limiting alcohol availability, restricting marketing and promotion of alcohol on campus, and then developing more policies and enforcing them. So it's when you think about the environment very broadly and all the different ways in which it either facilitates the problem or can help prevent the problem, you can go well beyond just general education and identifying those problem drinkers and getting them into treatment. As important as those two things are, it was not enough. So back when the higher education started in the early 90s, that was my diagnosis of the situation. In short, they needed to apply a public health approach.
Mm-hmm. So if we fast forward then just a few years to when then John was director of the center. John, what's your thoughts on the top prevention issues during your tenure?
Yeah, I think, following the period Bill was running the center, a lot of things were happening. So as he mentioned, in the early 90s, we didn't have a good grasp of the issue. I think by the time I took over, that had changed. The center had built some infrastructure. NIAAA had begun funding a series, along with Robert Wood Johnson, a series of studies to look at this. We started to get a feel for what worked. So I came in at a transition time. I think in the 6 years that I was director, a few things happened nationally. We saw first an uptick of people on campuses paying attention to this in a more systematic way. But by the end of those 6 years, I think we came into a period of kind of issue fatigue, where alcohol and drugs among college students started to get pushed out by other issues. And I think the other thing that happened during that period was you saw a very inconsistent implementation of evidence-based strategies on college campuses. So there were campuses that did amazing jobs, just really kind of went all in on this. And it usually was driven from the top down. Some college president got interested in the issue, and then kind of put a mandate out, and it went. And then in other places, it got relegated to, a part-time job in health services or student services or something. So that was really those were the big burning issues during that period, from the way I see it. By the time I left, you saw a full shift in the government, where the Department of Education had stopped funding the center. And I think that contributed to some of the fragmentation we saw nationally in the way things got implemented.
Mm-hmm. So good segue, because now we moved to Jim, the current director of the center. And Jim, in addition to you identifying kind of where we're at currently, was there about a 1 or 2 year gap from the time the previous center had ceased operation to when the current center picked back up? Was it about a year or two?
Actually, John can answer that better because he established it.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was about 6 months.
Oh, okay. So it
and
wasn't that long.
just what happened is, after the Department of Education dropped it, I had moved from San Diego State to Ohio State for my day job. And Ohio State gave us a little bit of money to kind of keep it going. And then the Hilton Foundation stepped in and gave us funding. And that really kind of restarted it. So,
Right. Okay.
and then now we can segue to Jim.
Yeah. So to Jim, to you, I got my own input when you're done, kind of the thread behind what I'm hearing all of you talk about. So, Jim, where are we at? What kind of top of mind for you?
Oh, well, there's a lot top of mind, but I'll step back a little. When I was starting as the director, it was a rebuilding time in many ways. There had been not just the higher ed center, but there was also the network addressing collegiate and alcoholic. I was on the executive board, but I can never remember all the names.
The network. We just called it the network.
We just called it the network, right? And that was really important. That was a big part of how we became a field, in my opinion, because we had representatives in the regions, and we were talking about this, and then there was the national meeting still, and so we were kind of in a rebuilding mode. And the Conrad Hilton Foundation gave us another grant when I was director, to help reestablish some of that network. And so we started convening the state coalition leaders, and that helped us kind of come back to a field where people could share information more easily. And then that was a big part of what we were trying to do, is build that infrastructure of connections and networking. And that, along with some changes that were happening very rapidly in the drug side of the prevention, with misuse of medicines, and then cannabis legalization was kind of in full swing on that. So a lot of people needed a lot of information. So we had the GenRx folks at Ohio State that partnered with us for the prescription part of things. We just kept getting experts and becoming experts on the cannabis issue. And then COVID hit. And so that so a lot of disruptions from that, and more disruptions, I think, now. And then we're seeing some even things that are tangential to alcohol and other drugs in the gambling and betting area. So I'm sort of foreseeing that as a place that, if you ask us 10 years, what were the issues? I think that's where we're at on those topics.
So kind of the thread I've been hearing, over the last year, I've been asked to do a couple of different presentations where I've been asked to kind of do a walk down memory lane and kind of talk about some of the touch points that have happened over the last 30 years, the span of basically my career. And the bottom line is a lot has happened. I mean, so much has happened in our field. And I go back to what Bill had mentioned. When I'm doing presentations and I talk to people about, the prevention science, that science is still relatively new-ish. I mean, Bill, you had said that we had a limited understanding of the AOD problem. We also had a quite limited understanding of what works. I mean, because the general prevention field really didn't build its prevention science until around 1994, when the Institute of Medicine had come out with the new classifications of prevention and such. And, just throughout, even right up until now, 3 decades does seem like a long time, but it's still kind of youngish, if you will, in terms of what we have. But I don't know what each of your thoughts are on that, but we've gone from point A back to when, Bill was the director, to now point B where Jim is the director. And I think, as you mentioned, a lot has happened in that period.
Well, just to underscore the way things were in the early 90s, when I started arguing for this focus on the environment, what evidence did I have that this public health approach was going to work for college prevention? None. So I was really arguing from the example of how we've addressed smoking, how we addressed alcohol-impaired driving, and said it follows. Of course, I was trained as a social psychologist, so to me, the fact that the environment influences people's behavior is hardly a novel concept. But for that reason, when I went to the first couple of national meetings, I would try to identify people who were presenting on something that would qualify as environmental management. And so I learned about the State University of New York program to work with the community in Albany, a classic environmental management approach to deal with problems in these neighborhoods caused by the bars and student misbehavior. Arizona State University with Corinne Johannesson and some of the things they were doing around tailgating, an environmental management approach. And so I could highlight these. And I worked with them to generate research literature. But it was several years later before we started to really see this evidence build up for this kind of approach. And then there was a lot more work on social norms marketing, a lot more work on the basics and other kinds of programs like that. So it changed everything. But I had to argue by analogy in the beginning. And I remember some people say, oh, this is just the next flavor of the month. This will pass.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, Tom Coldhurst just corrected me. Corrine was at the University of Arizona. Thank you, Tom. I almost said that, and I was thinking of somebody else at Arizona State. Yeah, so it really came to, I think the point where some of this research evidence got assembled was when NIAAA put together a task force to review the literature. There was one group focused on the epidemiology, another group focused on prevention, and we, for the first time, could bring this literature together.
Mm-hmm. And John had mentioned, NIAAA had funded a whole series of studies, and again, thinking back, it's only been a little over 2 decades. 2002, I believe, is when the NIAAA's the 4 tiers of effectiveness had come out, and the 3-in-1 framework. That kind of changed the landscape significantly for colleges and universities, because for the first time, they had some guardrails that they could follow.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's absolutely true. And NIAAA made a pretty good effort at pushing that out into the world. I think where it didn't totally connect was by the time that came out, the higher ed center had kind of shrunk into the smaller form, and there was without some of the big infrastructure that we had in the earlier decade of the center, there was workforce training issues. There was still this kind of lack of implementation. So while we knew what worked, getting it into the real world in a consistent way wasn't necessarily happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a challenge. Jim probably can speak more to that than I can right now. But
well, to pick up on that, you mentioned the workforce challenges, and I know we're 5 years removed from the pandemic. I mean, now that we're actually in an endemic stage, I just like saying that. It makes me sound smart, I guess. I don't know. But all kidding aside, Jim, I know colleagues of ours have brought it up at the national meeting and in other venues. The workforce issue, you look at the pandemic and the Great Resignation, higher ed was not immune to that, that there were, there was this resignation out of higher ed coming out of the pandemic. And do you still feel like we're dealing with workforce issues in that regard?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just the person in the health promotion department or whoever. Those positions tend to have a lot of turnover naturally. So there was already an issue of you always have to keep training someone new, because there isn't really a training program for people to do the work of this. They often are in public health or maybe social work or, so they may or may not even know that we exist, or that the College Aims exist, or those things aren't. Sometimes they don't even know that there's a Drug-Free Schools and Community Act and that there's a biennial report. It just gets lost. The history, the institutional memory is very short in a lot of the departments. But then up the chain, there's a lot of turnover as well. So the people who are hiring don't necessarily even understand what they should be looking for in that. So yes, that's been ongoing and went in full speed with resignations and the turnovers that were happening post-COVID.
Yeah. So my next question, John, I'm going to have you lead off on this. So we've got like this 30-ish year period kind of just established there. So since the time you were director of the center, what hasn't changed much in the prevention field, but you wish it would?
Yeah, and I think I just pick up on that same stream. I mean, on the research side of things, there's still some research going on in this area, but it's much less than it was. You know, it's like anything else. NIAAA's priorities shift and morph over time based on the director and, you know, what's going on in the world. That said, there's still some good research going on out there. Colleagues at USC that have managed to keep a nice portfolio of college-based studies. So on the one hand, I wish there was a more concerted kind of program of research to kind of continue that. And then I think the other piece, to kind of not to repeat my earlier comments, but we're still in need of some sort of transition from bench to bedside, and some way to build a workforce, some way to push this out where it really gets institutionalized at universities and colleges in a way that we're not going to run into the kind of problems Jim's pointing out. And that's a difficult thing. I wish I had the answer for it, but I don't.
So Jim, I'll segue to you. Kind of, and this even goes beyond your tenure as director. I mean, you and I first met as you were a grantee and I was at Department of Ed. And that was several years ago. So what hasn't changed much in the prevention arena, but you wish it would?
Well, I think, again, part of it is that workforce development. People don't know what they should be doing, or they assume they know and they don't. And so you see the feel-good programming type of things, the one-offs of a awareness day or something like that, and they don't know that that's really not going to move the needle at all. And so that continues. I think, and I'm going to show it a couple times. There is now this 8 core competencies that David Anderson, I had a little hand in it, but David Anderson developed with the PTTCs, and it at least codifies how complicated, the competencies that you need to have to do this. And so I'm hopeful, and we are trying to make sure people know about this and we can train on it, that people take it in a little bit more of a professional manner, where they look for structures that can guide them towards better programming. But that involves a lot of communication and continue because, again, new people are showing up all the time in our field.
Yeah. Bill, how about you? I know you've been removed as director for a while, but you've been in this, you've still remained in this field. What say you on this topic?
John was quite correct in pointing out that some of the universities that have done superior work in this area did have presidents who made it a priority. What hasn't changed is that very few do. And the underlying problem is that boards of trustees, boards of regents have not made alcohol and other drug prevention a priority. They're not holding the presidents accountable on this issue. I think, unfortunately, there's a failure to appreciate that every social problem that they face on campus among their students is exacerbated by alcohol and other drug misuse, sexual assault, student mental health, issues around harassment, low student retention rates, something they should care about. But the alcohol problem is just viewed as something separate from all of these other issues. And so it's very easy for attention to shift to the new problem. For the longest time now, it's been student mental health. Yes, but alcohol and other drug prevention plays a major role in causing and exacerbating that. So I think more recently, college presidents have failed to understand that this has contributed to a perception of the value of higher education. Bill Maher is somebody that I watch frequently, and he will just say, why does everybody need to go to college? Why do they need a 4-year vacation? 4 years of parties. And I think that has contributed to some of the resentment against student loans being forgiven and so forth. What's the value, not just to these individual students, but to society as a whole? And that is undermined by this perception. The college students are not working hard, and they're basically there to drink and get acquainted with their sexuality. I think that, we've talked before about all this research that's been done, and John and Jim have alluded to that people still don't know of that research or how to access it, and it's just overwhelming. So there are resources that we'll talk about later that help with that. And I think that another thing that hasn't changed is that people think of this as the job of the alcohol and other drug prevention coordinator, full stop. And one of the things that I always emphasized in talking about environmental approaches is that absolutely everybody on campus, no matter what their role is, has a job here. They can contribute to helping solve this problem. Everybody, all the way from the janitorial staff to the president. And this idea that it's one person's responsibility is ridiculous. The original education director that we had at the center when I directed it ended up leaving for a job at a college as an AOD prevention coordinator. She had been there 6 weeks, and her supervisor said, "Well, you've been here 6 weeks, and I'm not seeing any improvement here." And I was like, oh my God. Talk about not understanding the problem and what it takes and how everybody can play a role. I mean, that just fully captured it. So I think, yes, there's been improvement. We have some model universities, but the lack of institutional memory, not knowing the research, thinking it's one person's job, these things are still getting in the way.
So, Bill, I'm going to stay with you on the next question. Jim alluded to it, showed us a visual of the core competencies guide. And again, kind of this little 3-decade time frame we've established for here. I'm not sure if the answer changes or morphs over time, but talking about workforce development and core competencies, skills, and knowledge, Bill, what do you think are the 1 or 2, and there are more, but just for sake of time, what are, from your perspective, the 1 or 2 skills or knowledge areas that you believe are most critical for the next generation of prevention professionals to possess? Say that 3 times fast.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, learn what works. So access College AIM, College AIM, which stands for Alcohol Intervention Matrix. And this is published by the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, NIAAA. And it's as good a review of the research literature, helping practitioners prioritize what they're going to do, as you'll find out there. It needs to be updated. It's been yet again a few years since that was done. I'm not sure what NIAAA's interest is in that project at this point. And the other thing is you can learn a lot by accessing and studying the higher education center's resources. I was telling Jim earlier that I had occasion to visit the website for the Higher Ed Center. There is a wealth of information, and you can learn the basics of prevention. You can learn about particular strategies by going to the website, and it's very well organized. It's easy to find things. I think of the basic skills, I want to highlight one, which is having the ability to gain access to the media and to decision makers on campus and in the community. And this is really important because you need to be an advocate for making alcohol and other drug prevention a top priority. And you need to build a network of allies on campus and in the community. And that requires a skill set, better learned through tutelage than in a course. But with the right kind of training program, students would have that opportunity. And I just say one final thing. It's one of the things that I would often talk about is that alcohol and other drug prevention coordinators need to have the courage to be a leader. Even though they're in what many perceive as an entry-level position, there are leadership opportunities if they recognize them and act on them. A lot of times the coordinators freeze because they're in this bureaucracy and they may have a supervisor who's very hierarchical. Well, then at that point, you reframe your job that your job as a leader is to help your supervisor be a leader. But too often, I would see alcohol and other drug prevention coordinators just kind of like, well, there's nothing I can do because of X, Y, and Z, all the while missing opportunities to exercise leadership. And in part, it's a mindset. So that's something I hope that in training programs could be encouraged and methods of doing that demonstrated.
Thanks, Bill. So Jim, I'm going to come to you. You referenced the guide. You were actually part of the small group of folks Dr. David Anderson had pulled together to work on that guide. What are your thoughts on skills and knowledge folks need to possess working on this topic?
Yeah, and so there's all that, and then I'm also a coordinator of alcohol and other drug initiatives at San Diego State. So I'm feeling the pain of what it is to do this work, and I've done it long enough that I've recognized that the styles of the people above you have a big impact on what you're able to do. I had one AVP long time ago who sat me down, and I was talking about the programs that we had, and she said, well, you can't actually prevent drinking. And I was like, okay. So here I am, the professional on campus, being told you can't actually accomplish the goals that you have for your position. And so that's a really important component. You're hired to do it, but people may not actually want you to do the work that will take. And so managing up is really important. You have to be noticed. Sometimes you do programs that are high visibility for the administration as much as for the students, so that they see that there's a program so that sort of concept. It is difficult to kind of train that, but if people think about management in that line of, you manage yourself, you manage your network, and you manage those above you. It is an important component. I'm hopeful that the document of the professional competencies at least allow someone to flip through and see that there's a lot to this job, and maybe take care to assure that they're able to do the work in the various realms. That's, I think, optimistic, because we got to try to get it in their hands, but I think that that's probably one of the most important skills. You can learn a lot of other things through our webinars, but getting that sort of political savvy of doing the work, because you have to sometimes go against the will of the athletics department or the shops division, or how do you get into a res hall? All these things are tough if you haven't kind of looked up and not just what you have in mind.
Mhm.
Jim, if I can just say, one of the resources that you have on your through the center are these what you call water cooler chats. And that is an opportunity for people to present the problem that they're facing and to get coaching from their peers. We try to provide that coaching through the center and our technical assistance function, but it would be far better to hear from peers dealing with similar issues in the
Thanks, Bill, for mentioning that. John, I'll turn to you. What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
skills and
I would
knowledge?
add to this, having been at, I think, 5 universities now, every university's got its own kind of unique environment, not just a drinking environment and the surrounding environment, but the political environment, the way they approach problems, how much legal oversight there is on reaching out to the media and so on. So I think one of the key things, kind of building on what Jim said, is you're developing your network, kind of understanding how universities work in general, and then how your university works specifically is really important if you're trying to make a change.
Okay, I like that. So Jim, again, the guide, I know it's available on the center's site. I believe you've linked to it. It's also on campusdrugprevention.gov, DEA's website. We've put it there in addition to that brief webinar series that we created on each of the 8 competencies. I'm just going to throw out there, I'm always a proponent of communication skills being a big one, both written and oral, verbal, because it goes back to needing to be able to convey. We often say telling the prevention story. You need to know how to tell that story to various different folks, whether it's your president, your VP, the mayor, the neighborhood association, the athletics director. So communication is for me always going to be a big one, I think, to continue to hone. So I always throw that out there. Jim, I'm going to turn to you for our next question because you, I believe you alluded to this in your opening comments. The center's prevention efforts, rightfully, have traditionally focused on substance use, but there have been so many, I don't want to call them tangential because that makes them seem minimal, but how do colleges and even community-based prevention professionals working with institutions of higher ed address the emerging issues like mental health, impaired driving, gambling? And I know that, the center in its current form has been connected to all 3 of those, just to name the 3. But what do you say for our viewers on how to make those connections or how to work on those particular topics while also staying focused on the AOD issue?
Yeah, it's tough. And even when you started us off, we were talking about what are some of the issues, and they've been changing over time, right? So right now, I think emerging is gambling and betting as something that we at the center have been working to bring together experts for monthly calls to try to better understand what to do about that. Impaired driving has always been. In fact, John had a grant that successfully reduced impaired driving in his project that I was fortunate to also be a part of. So some of these are old, but they come again type of thing. Some of them are new. The betting and gambling is new. The app-based approaches, the prop betting, those are things. And this is where probably I've appreciated the fact that we are independent of funding from the federal government, because when we saw that this was an issue, we were able to quickly just add it to our portfolio versus trying to modify a grant or something like that. So we could do that, and I think we've been doing a really nice job of bringing awareness. So, but I go back to those competencies. How do you do this? Some of it is the strategic planning that you would need to do. So you have to figure out, well, what do you need from other people? Do you have a measure? Do you have some data to demonstrate that this is an issue for at least some of your students and it's impacting them? And then what could you do about it, and who do you need to bring together? So those are all part of those skills that the person in this role would need to do. And that's the first step, is in my mind, is get a sense of what is the problem. And that could be with some data. A lot of times on campuses, it's not the data, it's the incident that drives the program. That can be useful, but it may also not set you in the right direction, because you make too much of that incident and the peculiarities of what happened versus what's happening across the population of your students, and the varying risks that are happening. So sometimes I have used incidents. We had a very large drug bust at San Diego State back in 2008. That was an awakening moment for some folks. And we got a lot of evidence-based programs approved because of that. So having ideas of what needs to be done can help you move in a good direction if it's an incident-based ask. But better would be to have measures and see that you have problems and risks, and work to address them in that more systematic and strategic manner.
I think one thing that's not changed in 30 or so years is it often takes an incident, a tragedy, a something to be the catalyst for change, which is unfortunate. We try to move from that reactive to a proactive stance. Bill, let me turn to you. When you think back, were there emerging issues that may not have been AOD specific, but colleges were focusing on it or asked to focus on?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think going back to the early days of the Higher Ed Center, I would say now that we've had a fair amount of success with environmental approaches dealing with AOD issues, that we recognize that the campus and community environment can be changed to help address these problems. In short, use a public health approach. So if you're looking at mental health issues, the students, you want to have resiliency and life skills. You want them to seek help when they need it. You want students to help other students. And you want to ensure that a student who is struggling is recognized and connected to mental health care and supported. Well, there are systems and programs and policies that can be put in place to create an environment in which those things can happen. And this is the philosophy, for example, of the JED Foundation, J-E-D Foundation, a foundation that was born out of a family tragedy. And they recognize that there are things that can be done on campus to help with this. A lot of faculty think that they don't have a role to play here, that it's not their job. And they often make the mistake of thinking that if there's a student who's struggling, that they have to, in effect, serve as a counselor. And that's not what you want. You want them to recognize that the student is struggling and refer them to help resources on campus. One of the things that I know faculty would resist, but would be really important, is if the faculty advisor role continued through the entire time that students are on campus. So in my own undergraduate experience, I had a freshman advisor who had to sign off on my courses and have a conversation about how things are going and struggles and whatnot. And after freshman year, that was that. And I can certainly look back at those years and think I could have benefited from that continuing faculty contact. So that so much of what is behind this, the mental health problems, is just a lot of students feeling isolated and alone and not knowing who to turn to. So programs, policies, and systems in place are the key. And I have less robust thoughts about how to bring that approach to gambling, but I'm looking forward to what Jim does.
I hear homework. So thank you, Bill, for that. So John, I'm going to turn to you. How do you weigh in on this?
Yeah, it's back, and you not the gambling, but actually the first question you asked Jim, is that what you want me to address?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think during the period that I was there, we started seeing some shifts. Mental health was definitely one. Then you also kind of saw like a segmentation of the alcohol and drug problem. So oftentimes it would be like, we're just going to focus on fraternities, or we're just going to focus on athletes. So you'd get at various campuses, the problem seemed to be just one segment of the overall student population. And I think it's an extension of that same kind of thinking that Bill talked about at the very beginning, where in the beginning it was an individual level problem. We didn't see it as an environmental problem. And kind of maybe our push towards environmental thinking got folks to think about one level of abstraction higher. But getting people to kind of look at the whole environment was still a challenge at that point. I think towards the tail end of my tenure, we also started to see colleges trying to implement things that were closer to the mission of the university, in that they were educational, where they could check a box, you took a course, or something like basics that fit into an existing framework that they already had in the university. Whereas the kind of bigger environmental prevention efforts that included, enforcing policy and adjudicating things got fairly political on several campuses.
So I think back in my own experience with this, at the beginning of my career working in New York State, we had two separate agencies, one focused on alcohol, one focused on drugs. And when they merged to become Oasis, there was a lot of turf wars. And winners and losers, who was going to win and lose out on this? And when I worked at SAMHSA prior to coming to DEA, I started having flashbacks to that, and actually helped inform kind of my thinking on this issue around mental health and the substance use issues, because there was a move to integrate, that was the word, with a strategic initiative to integrate mental health and substance use. And of course, I was working for Fran Harding, I've dropped her name many times, my mentor, as she was director of the center. And I immediately saw, again, the setting up of turf wars, who was going to win and lose in this notion of integrating these two systems. And I always pushed back, and I kind of settled on alignment, because the mental health issues and substance use issues are so closely aligned. It's not a matter of which one is more important than the other. I talk about this in my presentations. that, students who come into counseling centers and health centers talk about misusing alcohol and other drugs because they're feeling anxious or depressed. And yet those same student will say that they're feeling anxious or depressed because of their alcohol or other drug use. And so, I really appreciate, Jim, what you mentioned, for example, about always look at your data. I mean, the data will drive your programming. Obviously, there may be some political influences that are going to, dictate what you're going to focus on. But the data, should always be a bit of a beacon for you, in addition to your overall strategic planning process. But I've appreciated what all three of you have lent to this with kind of three different kind of perspectives and around strategic planning, environmental approaches, and programs, policies, and systems. Whatever I don't like to minimize it by calling it the issue du jour, but sometimes that's what it feels like. And again, having each of these, your thoughts on this really, I think, are critical for our viewers to heed. So thank you for your input on all of that. Bill, I'm going to turn to you. And again, I don't think it's difficult for you and John to answer this, but you've been a bit removed from being the director of a center, but you've obviously watched the field and the center over time because of your connection still in this field. How has the center's role evolved in supporting universities with staff training and professional development? I mean, we talked about competencies. So how has the center, from when you started to maybe where you see it now, if you've looked at that? Bill?
Well, back in the day, we had to hold in-person
when there was no
training.
internet.
There was no internet, exactly. We had to hold in-person trainings. I came to describe myself as an itinerant preacher because I would go to all these different states and different meetings, trying to get people to pivot to a broader public health approach, as we've discussed. Our publications were hard copy only. We had a monthly newsletter that went out by mail, and we had to work really, really hard to make the center and its prevention philosophy known. And I think I just share one really discouraging moment. So we put together a president's leadership group, and I worked with these college presidents to come up with a set of recommendations for other college presidents. And the Chronicle of Higher Education did an article on it. That's a generous term because it was basically about 3 column inches. And in the same issue, they had a half-page article about this silly debate between proponents of environmental approaches versus social norms marketing approaches. Half a page. And it was very personal between the two spokespeople for those approaches. Well, now the internet has indeed changed everything. And I did look at the Higher Ed Center's current website, and the webinars and learning collaboratives are all done online, a wide range of topics. There's one on advocacy that caught my attention, harm reduction, environmental prevention. I mean, it's a really rich repository of past trainings and learning cooperatives. The annual meeting, that was such an expensive thing for the US Department of Education to support. And a lot of places, of course, don't have great travel budgets now. Well, there's an option to attend virtually to many, if not most of the sessions at the Higher Ed Center's national meeting. And now, as Jim mentioned before, you can do networking through Zoom and meeting with the statewide coalitions, these water cooler chats. So there's just, because of the advances in technology, there's much more immediacy. that's possible, and people helping one another, and having you don't have to go to the training event. You can go online and experience the training event and learn from it. So it's a different world indeed. And I I'm just astounded still. I know for somebody my age, I remember getting an Apple II computer and spending all this money on extra hardware so I could do this thing called word processing. And in today's dollars, my first wife and I spent on that Apple II computer with word processing capability would be $15,000 today. So, the world is indeed a different place, and it's made the higher ed centers work. It's facilitated it in many, many ways that they've taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm. Well, I sort of joked with, the internet hadn't been invented back then, but it had. I mean, obviously the center did have a website, but John, as I turn to you, as I'm not specifically recalling, but social media certainly wasn't a thing back, when Bill was the director of the center. Not to tee it up and say this is what you have to focus on, but John, when you were the director of the center until now, like staff development, program development, how do you think things have evolved?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think technology is brought us to a place where the higher ed center was able to survive, where without the big federal funding.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things when we went through that transition period, our ability to push stuff out online, to have an active Twitter account and all the different social media accounts that we had, was quite a bit different. It was also easier in the sense that we didn't have to jump through a bunch of bureaucratic hoops to do it once we were under the Hilton Foundation. And I think one of the things that I was forced to figure out, and Jim's done a great job at continuing, is you could keep the center going without a huge budget. Now it'd be nice to have a huge budget, but you're able to still do quite a bit if you're creative and use media and so on. I mean, I think, like I'll give you one example. One of the things we did under the Hilton Foundation grant was develop Screen U, which was an expert online expert program that we were able to make available for nominal cost. Those sorts of things just weren't doable in the earlier iterations of the center. Even though some of those products existed, people spent a lot of money developing them. They couldn't just give them away. And so I think we're at a different place in that regard. And the same goes for collecting data. To go back to the data point, it's easier to build data collection systems. I think back to when we had the Core Institute, and you had Scantrons, and you'd have to get the Scantrons out to all the students, collect them, send them off to Illinois for scanning, get back, or all that can be done much easier now with some simple tools like Qualtrics and even SurveyMonkey, just some simple things that campuses can do. So that I think has made a difference. One other point, I guess, just to build off a little bit of Bill's comment about the old, social norms versus environmental, that was a big thing back then. And I think time has kind of erased a lot of those artificial divides. Where people are looking for things that work and they're not locked into some ideological way of doing things, and there's no one best way or best fit. I remember Jim and I were at a meeting, NIAAA, where when we raised our environmental approach, we were called the Prevention Taliban. And it was just, there was really like this visceral kind of like, if you're not in our camp, you've got it completely wrong. And I think a lot of that's gone now.
Yeah.
I mean,
John, I was actually told that I was a fascist. Yeah.
So, I maybe Jim can speak to that more, but I haven't, at least from the sidelines, seen as much of that ideological clashing that we used to see.
Yeah.
For the record, I'm not going to talk about whether or not you're a fascist.
Well, please renounce.
Well, the thing is
that.
So I had proponents of social norms marketing, a leading proponent, say that environmental management was fascism. And at the same time, as director of the center, I am a social psychologist by training. Social norms marketing makes a tremendous amount of sense to me. And I had my colleague at the Harvard School of Public Health, Henry Wexler, in his book, basically say that I was a tool of big alcohol because I supported this approach, which he viewed as simply trying to diminish, the scope of the problem. So on one hand, I'm a fascist. On the other, I'm a tool of big alcohol. And I always thought, well, I can be both. You can do these things at the same time.
The battle scars, I see them. So Jim, what do you think on this?
Well, yeah, kind of going a little bit back. I'm trying to remember the question, but obviously we've done a lot.
Staff training, program development. That's what we're looking at. Staff training.
Yeah. Thanks. Obviously, we do a lot online. Our water cooler chats, which were mentioned already, that was an outgrowth of COVID, where we realized people just needed to call in and create a community and talk about what's going on. So we had that concept of not having an agenda, but bringing people together and let them talk. And it was so popular, we've kept it this whole time. We do sometimes seed the conversation, but it is really helpful to build that network. The network is a huge part of what I see the center facilitating for the nation, because now there are other organizations that are very important that we partner with, NASPA being one of them, ARHE another, ACHA, and I'm probably forgetting someone, so sorry if I did, but there are other places, but we see it as important to network those who have other networks. So there still is a COHESAP, which is a coalition of organizations around alcohol and drug, and we're now saying gambling as well, so that NERSA and the residence hall folks and NCAA, building those connections so that no matter where the professional is coming from, they can find information. Because we've talked about this model of there's someone in health promotion who does alcohol, or there's a preventionist. That's one model, but a lot of campuses don't have a dedicated person, or it's within their rec center, or it's in the health center as maybe a nurse, and so that sort of reach to get them through other organizations and working together is very important in my mind, because there's some 4,000 campuses out there, and they all have their own little idiosyncratic organizational charts, and we almost certainly are not encountering all of them, but we do our best to have the materials there, and yeah, so that's how we've been doing it in today's world.
So John, I'm going to come back to you because it's this variation on this question, this theme, talking about new training programs emerging. And I've got just a couple of examples that we had identified. The PTTC, funded through SAMHSA, has a prevention integration course. USC has its master's in prevention. How can the center or, we're focusing in on the center, further support workforce development. I mean, we've been talking about this for a bit now, this theme, and talking about competencies and such. So where do you fall on this?
Yeah, I think the first thing is connecting the center to some of those efforts. There's a real rich history here that can be kind of plumbed for some of those academic programs out there. And I can speak a little bit more to USC's addiction science master's degree that, as they were developing that, it was a lot of great public health people, and there was tobacco people and exercise people, it was more public health driven, but from a prevention standpoint. But it was pretty amazing. Like, a lot of people really didn't realize the depth of work that had been done on this alcohol issue. And so I think making those connections is critical. The other thing that's interesting, and I just finished a project for NAZADAD looking at the prevention workforce nationally. And it's, I don't know how much we actually know about our college prevention workforce. So just even taking a step back and really understanding the types of folks on campuses that are doing this, what kind of training they need, and so on, would be a nice first step.
So, Jim, I'll turn to you. I referenced earlier, I mentioned the Great Resignation or such, but then we talk about the turnover in this field. With workforce development, previous agencies I've worked at, and now, we talk about people aging out, like retiring. We lose a lot of people that way, but we lose a lot of people because of what you mentioned, just the turnover rate in this. So from where you sit as the current center director, how can the center help further support workforce development?
Yeah, well, that's a huge part. I'm sorry, was it to me?
Yeah, it was Jim. Yeah, I was going to Jim first.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the top part of our mission right there. So we're doing it. Obviously, there can always be more, and we know that the part of the problem is that institutional memory may not exist. So we try to be a place they find when they Google, how do I do this type of thing. But it is difficult. We also understand that sometimes we're in economic situations, and I think we're certainly entering those again, where there won't be travel to conferences. Nor will there be money to bring someone in to do like an evaluation of what they're doing and give guidance. So I'm hopeful that we can promote those 8 competencies as a really nice start to expand their understanding of what they don't understand, right? That's one of the hardest parts, is people think they can do this. They think that as long as they have a peer health educator who can relate to their students, they're gonna magically make this happen. That's not really the case. Those peer health educators are gonna need to be really well trained to actually do positive work versus some things that either are ineffective or actually harmful. And so, that's what we're up against. I'm always open to more ideas, but also we are in a place where we can help campuses do some work to get them ready. When we go to campuses, and we have a couple funded projects around impaired driving. And so we've been recruiting campuses to be part of a network that would address it on their own campus, but be networked so that when they do something, everyone learns from it. When we started approaching campuses, a lot of them said, well, that's not really our problem. We don't have that issue. And then we asked them more questions, and it turned out they really didn't know if they had the issue. They just assumed it didn't occur. And so we've been convening experts for monthly calls. You're part of it, Rich. And so you're familiar that we created some measures and give those out to anyone who's interested in using them so that they can be informed of what their problems are, including an environmental scan. And that environmental scan kind of has them work through a lot of the types of things you would need to know if you wanted to do any type of prevention in the AOD sphere. And so some of this could be kind of a self-study in a sense, if and we're kind of moving in that direction where we challenge people to be a little more systematic about what they think they know, and then lead them towards where they can see improvement opportunities based on that.
Mm-hmm. So Bill, I do turn to you. I don't recall, so I started at Department of Ed in 1999. You were the director of the center then. I wasn't overseeing the work of the center, but I was part of a team at Ed that obviously interacted with the center and you and the staff. I don't recall workforce being the turnover that we have like now. I mean, there was a little sense of stability, I guess. We saw that anecdotally, at least in the faces we'd see at the annual meeting, like we'd see the same people. But what's your perspective on the issue of workforce development kind of now?
Well, even back then there was a fair amount of turnover, but you're exactly right for the reasons that have been discussed, that it's much more of a problem now. So, I actually want to think about the people who are in college now and in master's programs now. I was delighted to hear about USC's Master's in Prevention program. I had hoped when I was teaching at the Boston University School of Public Health that within my department, I could offer 2 courses that would help people who had a general interest in prevention get channeled into college prevention work. And that went nowhere. Even though I could identify over the years several students who have chosen that as a field. I think they heard enough examples in my own teaching from the college prevention world that they got interested in it. What I would encourage Jim and his team to look at is offering some kind of online certificate program for higher education administrators, but also current students. So for example, if that had been in place when I was teaching at Boston University, I could have said to the students who were interested in this or who might be interested in it, we don't offer that, but there is a certificate program offered through The Ohio State University where you can get the training you need to be effective in that job and to really stand out in a job interview because you'll know your stuff. So that's a big ask, but I think it would contribute enormously to the field. Short of that, we can refer everybody to USC for their training. As part of this, I also think that it would be easier to get new people to embrace this as their career. Part of the turnover has been that people come in at an entry level, they're focusing on alcohol and other drug prevention, and for them it's a stepping stone to bigger and greater things in social affairs or some other aspect of higher ed administration. A lot of the schools where the best work has been done, it's because they have leadership that has stayed in place for years. They have embraced this as their mission as an administrator. So, that could be part of a certificate program to really encourage people to think of it that way. And I'm not familiar with everything that's on the higher ed website, but this whole issue of leadership development and developing the mindset of a leader is so important here, because it's easy to get ensnared by a bureaucracy and to think that there's nothing you can do without approval through layers of administrators who are above you. But there's opportunities for leadership everywhere. And developing that mindset and knowing what the skills are, how to exercise leadership, I could see as a real important focus for the center.
So a couple things, mindful of time. We're coming up on the home stretch. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to get to our last question that I had for you, but we do have a couple of questions that come in from the audience. So Bill, I'll stay with you. Would you say that the CHES or the prevention specialist certificates or credential fit what you're talking about?
No, because they're very general in their scope, as I understand it. Now, as Jim has talked about, what's required in this job, there are so many different skill sets that you're not going to get from your coursework and then taking an exam to get that certification. How to work with the media, how to supervise or how to run a meeting, how to build a network. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's a very complex job. And so I think it does require the kind of specialized training that we've just been talking about. It's been a long time since I've looked at exactly what they're testing for with CHES, but I remember looking at it years ago and thinking, yeah, it's a nice to have if you've taken a certain course of study, and you can add that to your resume. But this requires a very, very extensive and specific set of skills.
Thanks, Bill. So Jim, I'll come to you with this next question, and try to maybe keep it to a minute and a half. Although the question's longer than that too, but I'm going to just try to boil it down for you. If you could pick one promising practice or evidence-based prevention program or practice to implement on a residential campus, what would you suggest? We have a substance-free campus policy and basics and a peer education program currently in place. We do not have an AOD specialist. I'm a one-person office and responsible for all wellness prevention, so capacity is an issue. Go.
I would actually start with assessment and get a better understanding of what it is you would be trying to prevent. You have evidence-based programs already, so that's great. Make sure that you're doing them to fidelity and that they're reaching those who need it. But what I didn't hear was we also do surveys. We understand more about it. Maybe an environmental scan to learn more about where, when, if they're not on campus because you have a campus policy against it. Where are they going? Does that mean you have more driving? So figure out a little bit more about the problem that you want to prevent, and then work backwards from there.
Great. Thank you for that, Jim. Okay, so we've got about 6 minutes left. Perfect tee up for our final question. I'm going to start with John. You're all getting the same question here. Sort of how I end the podcast that I host for DEA each month. It's the advice question. So what is one piece of advice you have for our viewers who want to make a difference in preventing alcohol and drug misuse among college students? John, start with you.
Hire John Clapp at John. No, I'm just kidding. I think I don't want to just echo what Jim said, but I'm a data person, been a data person my whole life. I think you really do need to understand what you're trying to prevent and your local context. Very important. So And as I said earlier, it doesn't necessarily have to be some expensive big study. The Higher Ed Center had several guides, and they're probably still out there, on how to do an environmental scan, which really is just one person and a couple students could do. And it's a great exercise to get thinking about the problem, understanding it better, and to be able to communicate to people above you as a preventionist.
Great, thank you. Bill, what's your piece of advice?
Go back in time and buy Apple stock at $3 a share. Well,
I guess we're at the comic relief portion of this event. So,
okay. So seriously, the piece of advice I would give is to identify and train students to understand the public health approach so that they can work with you as informed collaborators. Too often, people think about bringing in students and listening to their ideas about what can be done. Valuable perspective, but it's an uninformed perspective usually. They can give much better advice and be more fully participating team members if you actually provide some training and tutelage along the way. And I always think of the University of Missouri in that vein. School did an excellent job of bringing in students and training them and having that much more labor force to work with. So that would be my advice.
thank you for that. Jim, turn to you.
I'll show this again, and I know there's already the link. Look at those 8 competencies. One of my proud moments in advising on that particular document was in the spirit of The Ohio State University. I encouraged us to have the guide to the 8 competencies. And I really think it's important that people look at those. That you could slice and dice them in different ways, but it is complex. And so understand what you are good at. What are some things you need to address in terms of workforce development within yourself or your team. And it also opens your thinking about what else you could be doing, because if you notice these, you'll notice assessment, but also research. You'll also notice leadership, and you'll notice those types of things that maybe you're not implementing. So it's not just a program, but it's really kind of an approach and a layer of understanding why you need all of these competencies. So I would encourage you, the manual, the guide is kind of listy. It doesn't necessarily tell you how to do these things, but it shows you that these are important, and then you can start developing what you need to accomplish this goal.
Thank you, Jim. Moderator's prerogative, I'm going to offer my own as well. It's a takeoff of what Jim just mentioned. Hone your craft. The work in prevention is not finite. It's always evolving. The science continues to evolve. The tip I give folks when I'm out doing presentations and such, go to your calendar and set yourself a standing half-hour or 60-minute meeting with yourself each week, and read a blog, listen to or watch a podcast, read a journal article. If you do that, you've got 52 weeks of professional development right there. Use the 8 competencies as your compass, if you will, on something new you're going to learn each week, but definitely hone your craft. With that, Bill, John, Jim, thank you so much for all of the insight and advice and just perspective that you bring to this very issue. I know I continue to learn something new, and I'm sure our viewers have as well. So thank you for being part of this. Anthony, I am turning it over to you as we come to the 3:30 Eastern time mark.
Well, I echo everything that Rich just shared, and thank you, Rich, for moderating the session, and thank you for Dr. Lange, Dr. Dejong, and Dr. Clapp for sharing of your insights and experience with the center. I do just have a couple of closing housekeeping slides I'd like to share with everybody. Just as a reminder, today's session has been recorded, and you can expect to see it uploaded to the Scarlet Canvas course within 3 business days. Again, the Scarlet Canvas course is where you'll be able to find the Zoom links for the next session in the Learning Collaborative, as well as session resources and slides as we go through the series. So again, the next session as part of the Learning Collaborative will be taking place on April 24th. It is a 3-part series and will be taking place virtual all day. We also have a free webinar taking place on April 16th and is focusing on connecting the dots, working with fraternities and sororities. And again, the 2025 National Meeting Call for Proposals has been extended, but will be closing this Friday. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and I hope you have a great day. Take care, all.